A teenage boy stands quietly in an airport. Moments later, he's surrounded by police, accused by a furious pilot of being a threat. But what no one knew, not the pilot, not security, was that this boy's father was one of the most powerful men in aviation. What happened next? It shocked the entire terminal. And the internet. It all started with a sound no one expected in a peaceful airport terminal. A loud, angry voice cutting through the hum of boarding calls and rolling luggage. Hey! Hey, step away from that gate. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Passengers looked around, confused. A female pilot in uniform, tall and assertive, was storming across the terminal. Her finger pointed at a teenage boy standing quietly near the departure screen. That boy was Malik, 14 years old, bright-eyed, soft-spoken, wearing a black hoodie, sweatpants, and sneakers. Nothing out of the ordinary. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't pushing buttons, he wasn't even near the boarding gate. He was simply standing there, waiting for his dad, but that didn't matter. The pilot rushed forward, her eyes wild with suspicion. Security! This kid was messing around. I saw him touching the control panel at gate 7. She yelled. Malik's eyes widened. Ma'am, I was just... Don't speak, she barked. You think this is a game? You can't just loiter around sensitive areas, not in today's world. Passengers nearby froze. Some instinctively moved away. Others pulled out their phones, hitting the record button. The scene was escalating fast. 3 airport security officers arrived within seconds. Surrounding Malik, one placed a hand near his taser. Another spoke into a radio, and Malik? He didn't run. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He simply said, I was waiting for my dad. I didn't touch anything. But no one seemed to hear him. The pilot paced back and forth, fuming. He was lingering near the jet bridge entrance. That's a clear violation. For all we know, he could be a hacker or worse. He's dressed like, well, look at him. That last line made a few passengers gasp. One woman whispered to her husband, that's profiling. Still, no one stepped in. The officers began to ask Malik for ID. He didn't have one. He was 14. One officer looked skeptical. No ID and hanging around a gate? Not good. Malik stayed calm. My dad went to check in our bags. He told me to wait right here. The pilot laughed sharply. Yeah, right. Convenient excuse. The tension was electric. It was the kind of moment that makes or breaks trust in public institutions. A quiet child turned into a threat, not because of his actions, but because of how he looked. Because someone in authority assumed ... and just when it seemed like Malik might be led away in handcuffs for a crime he didn't commit. A calm voice echoed from the edge of the crowd. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned. A tall black man in a sharp navy blue suit stepped forward, holding a briefcase and flashing a federal badge from under his coat. I'm Charles Bennett. And that young man you're harassing, that's my son. The room went dead silent. Malik stood frozen. The security officers had now formed a semicircle around him. One of them resting his hand near his taser, the other scanning him from head to toe like he was a threat to national security. The teenage boy, just 14 years old, looked around, not with fear, but with confusion and quiet disbelief. He hadn't done anything wrong. No yelling, no running, no forbidden area. He had done what millions of kids do while traveling. Stood near the gate, waiting for his parent. But to the angry pilot, Malik wasn't just a kid. He was a suspect, a threat. Someone to be controlled? And worse. No one was defending him. The pilot's voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. We live in dangerous times, she said dramatically. You never know who's planning something. We have to act fast, even if it seems extreme. Passengers. Nearby started whispering. A man in a business suit frowned. A young mother pulled her child closer. And yet, no one stepped up. Malik slowly raised both his hands. Not because he was guilty, but because he'd seen others do it, on TV, in real life. Because that's what young black boys learn. Sometimes raising your hands is the safest way to be seen as human. I didn't touch anything, he said quietly. I just looked at the flight monitor. One of the officers, trying to remain professional, asked, Where are your parents, son? My dad's checking in the bags, Malik said. He told me to wait here. That's all I was doing. The pilot rolled her eyes. He has no ID. He's by himself. Dressed in a hoodie, standing by the gate. Come on, how many signs do we need? Asterisk, another officer muttered. It's a little thin, don't you think? Asterisk, but the pilot pushed on, insisting on checking cameras, suggesting that Malik might have been trying to slip past security. What if he had an accomplice? We can't ignore red flags. Not in my airport. Asterisk, her words weren't just about caution, they were about control. She was trying to prove a point, not protect anyone. And Malik was paying the price. Asterisk, passengers watched, phones were recording. But Malik stood still, his voice calm, his expression clear. Asterisk, I'm not the one making this a scene. Asterisk, and then, just as one of the officers reached for his radio, a deeper, more commanding voice cut through the noise. Asterisk, is there a problem here? Asterisk, is there a problem here? Asterisk, the voice was calm, but carried the weight of someone used to being in command. Every head turned. Even the loud pilot went silent. Asterisk, stepping through the crowd, was a tall black man in a dark navy suit, polished shoes, and a calm but authoritative look. He held a black leather briefcase in one hand and had an American flag pin on his lapel. Asterisk, he wasn't panicked. He wasn't angry. He was precise. Asterisk, that's my son, he said, stepping next to Malik and placing a protective arm around his shoulder. Asterisk, the pilot's tone immediately changed. She took a half step back. Sir, I didn't know. He was asterisk, he was standing exactly where I told him to, the man replied, looking her dead in the eye. He followed every rule, every instruction. And yet, he's being treated like a criminal. Asterisk, one of the officers stepped in, trying to ease the moment. Sir, this was just a routine check. The pilot had concerns and we had to respond. The man pulled out a black leather ID wallet and held it up without raising his voice. Charles Bennett, Federal Aviation Administration Regional Director. That changed everything. The officer's posture shifted. The color drained from the pilot's face. You could almost hear heart-skipping beats. Asterisk, I briefed airport command just yesterday, Charles continued. My son and I are traveling to Washington, D.C. for a national youth aviation program. He was invited as one of the youngest participants. He studied more about airplanes than most adults in this room. Asterisk, Malik looked up at his dad, proud, but also hurt. You could see it in his eyes, that sting of being misjudged, yet again. Asterisk, Charles didn't raise his voice, but every word landed like thunder. Asterisk, do you know what this moment tells my son? That no matter how hard he studies, how respectful he is, or how bright his future might be, he'll still be seen as a threat. Asterisk, the pilot tried to speak, but words failed her. I didn't know. Asterisk, that's the problem, Charles replied. You didn't know, and instead of asking, you assumed. Asterisk, passengers started nodding. Some clapped. Others just watched in quiet admiration. Asterisk, one officer lowered his head. Another whispered, Sir, we're truly sorry. Charles looked down at Malik and gently straightened his son's hoodie. You did nothing wrong. You don't owe anyone here an apology? And to the crowd, Charles said what needed to be heard. If your title makes you feel powerful enough to mistreat a child, then maybe you shouldn't wear that title at all. The silence was heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. Asterisk, passengers who had been watching quietly were now fully tuned in. Phones were still recording. Some were live streaming. The scene unfolding wasn't just dramatic. It was historic. Asterisk, the pilot, now visibly shaken, tried to regain control. Asterisk, I understand now, sir, she stammered. But you have to admit, in uniform, we're trained to react fast. There have been incidents before. I was only doing my job. Charles turned to face her, his tone still calm, but sharper than before. No, he said, you were doing what you thought was right, based on your own fear? Not facts, not training, fear? He glanced at the security team, who were now awkwardly stepping back. This young man is my son. He was standing exactly where I asked him to, peacefully, respectfully, and quietly. And yet, instead of observing, asking, or de-escalating, you went straight to accusation. Asterisk, the pilot crossed her arms defensively. He didn't have an ID? He looked like he didn't belong near the gate? Asterisk, Charles raised an eyebrow. Didn't belong? Because of how he was dressed, or because of how he looked? Asterisk, she didn't answer. She didn't have to. Asterisk, and that's when Charles dropped the line that changed everything. Asterisk, you just profiled the son of the man who oversees flight safety regulations in this entire region. Asterisk, a ripple of gasps echoed through the terminal. One man whispered, "No way," while a woman quietly said, "That's karma right there." Charles wasn't done. "Do you know how many young black kids are afraid to dream big? Afraid to enter spaces like this because they're constantly watched, judged, or feared. Malik wants to fly planes, to become a pilot. This was supposed to be his first step into the world he's been working toward. Asterisk, he turned to his son. And now his introduction to aviation is being treated like a crime scene. Asterisk, the officers now stood completely silent. Their radios still buzzed on their hips, but no one dared say a word. Asterisk, the pilot, now red-faced, tried to recover. I'll report this to corporate. I didn't mean any harm. Asterisk, Charles nodded. You don't need to mean harm to cause it. That's what unconscious bias looks like. And if someone in your position can't recognize that, maybe the cockpit isn't the right place for you. Asterisk, a young girl nearby clapped. Then another. Soon, the entire row of seats behind the gate joined in a slow, supportive applause. This wasn't just about Malik anymore. This was about every kid who's ever been judged too quickly. Asterisk, every traveler who's ever felt watched instead of welcomed. Asterisk, every parent who's ever had to stand between their child and injustice. Asterisk, and in that moment, justice didn't just speak, it stood. By now, the terminal had transformed. Asterisk, what began as a scene of accusation had become a lesson in humility, justice, and strength. Phones were still recording, passengers were still whispering, and the pilot? She had gone completely quiet, her authority, confidence, and assumptions shattered. Asterisk, just then. Two members of airport management rushed onto the scene, clearly alerted by the commotion and the name Charles Bennett. Asterisk, Mr. Bennett, one of them said breathlessly, we're deeply sorry. This situation should never have happened. We assure you it does not reflect our values. Asterisk, Charles didn't nod, he didn't offer a polite smile. He simply looked down at Malik, who still hadn't spoken much. Still calm, still composed, but no longer confused. Just tired. Asterisk, my son didn't need this today, Charles said softly. He came to see jets, learn about flight controls, and explore the future he's been dreaming of since he was 8 years old. Asterisk, the manager looked at Malik, regret written all over his face. You're welcome here anytime, young man. And when you're ready, we'll arrange a full cockpit tour, with your father's permission, of course. Asterisk, Malik gave a small nod, his lips lifting just slightly. But the weight of the moment was still sitting heavy on his shoulders. Asterisk, as for the pilot? Asterisk, she quietly turned and walked away with one of the officers, face burning, hands trembling. That walk, not down the jet bridge, but down the hallway of accountability, was her first real flight into reality. Asterisk, later that day, the airline issued a public statement. They acknowledged the incident, confirmed that the pilot had been placed on immediate suspension, and announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. But no amount of corporate language could undo the damage or erase the video that had already gone viral. Asterisk, the clip of Malik standing calm as security surrounded him. Asterisk, the quiet confidence of Charles Bennett flashing his FAA credentials. Asterisk, and the pilot's expression the moment she realized who she had just accused. Asterisk, it was more than a headline, it was a mirror held up to society. A week later, Malik sat in the jump seat of a private jet simulator at the FAA training center. His name was mentioned in aviation blogs. Young kids reached out to say he had inspired them to chase their own dreams, even when the world tells them they don't belong. Asterisk. And that's what this story was really about. Not power, not punishment, asterisk, but presence, dignity, and the quiet strength of knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Asterisk, in a world full of snap judgments and silent witnesses, be the person who speaks up. Be the calm in the storm. Be the presence that reminds others we all deserve to be seen, not through the lens of fear, but with the clarity of respect. Asterisk, if this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Asterisk, drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were standing in that terminal?